my journey has been quite exceptional, quite different, I guess. As a child, I was raised for 4 years as a Hindu Hare Krishna child.
Oh, right.
And then I was brought back to the West and kind of, quote unquote, brain cleansed after the brainwash, right? And then I had this very strong spiritual inkling in me, and I went into Christian, evangelical Christianity, and 15 years after I joined an evangelical church, I was deep in meditation and prayer. Having lived this life as a child and as a teenager, I felt like I wasn't living up to the standards that religion and spirituality was demanding of me. So I went into a very, very hardcore prayer ritual and going to church every day, and entered this very tough space in my mind. To the point where I lived in a realm of magic almost, right? It was demons, angels, God, and also all the philosophy from Hinduism that was kind of bubbling up and trying to reconcile. And I went into a very strange space. I got quite scared because of the things that were happening. The thoughts were coming to mind, to the point where I had this strange message from some higher entity asking me to take my life and to take the life of my fiance at the time. I was seen by a psychiatrist, and through some diagnoses and analysis, they said you're going through a psychotic episode, basically, and they medicated me. And all this fantastic and magical world that I was living went away, basically, within a couple of days. And from then on, I became a bit of a scientismist. I actually created another club on Clubhouse called Scientism. And the definition I use for scientism is that through scientific study and research, we can better understand the universe and the world around us. And I think it doesn't conflict with your views, because you have a lot of scientific research that you put forth and that you quote in order to understand the universe. So it doesn't take you away from, I guess, spirituality or idealism and all these other concepts that are not completely physicalist in nature.
Yeah, but in fact, if I can just interrupt, I would say what you just described is science, not scientism.
Yeah. I know. I use it. I use the label a little bit tongue in cheek. To be honest, it's. I'm not completely trying to. It's just a way of having a little bit of fun and poking fun at myself more than anything. To kind of admit the humanity of who we are and our biases and all these things. And so the question now that I have given you a little bit of a preface of that is my biases and my basic understanding of the world, because I've become so fascinated by neuroscience, neuropsychology, the way the brain works, the way biology works, the way the universe kind of interacts, seemingly, in the opinion of some, to evolve a brain and create consciousness. And having had 3 relapses of psychosis and finally deciding I'm not going to go off my meds, I'm going to keep chemically stable because I don't want to go into a dangerous space. I see that your view is kind of, you divide the world into 3 parts: the physical, the psychic, and then the spiritual.
Yeah.
And they're all real. How do you reconcile the idea that the brain has such a powerful modeling engine that we could be imagining all this, and what research do you have to share with us that kind of confirms the idea that the mind is not just making up all this, finding patterns in nature and having just evolved spirituality rather than it being a fundamental thing that exists out there.
Okay, well, thank you, Alfonso. That is very interesting. And before answering that last question, can I comment on your earlier discussion, because I was fascinated with that, and in some sense, there's a parallel with my own, because you've obviously gone through a spiritual journey which has taken you through, different paths, Hare Krishna, and then fundamentalist Christianity and other things. And I was rather similar, because I started off as a Christian. I then became interested in Buddhism. I then became interested in Kabbalah and Sufism. So I don't regard myself as restricted to a particular religion. I'm interested in spirituality in general, and I feel all these different paths are valid. They're all different routes up the mountain. And so I think it's actually, for many, for some people, it's important to try different spiritual paths. Now, then you referred to your own, some personal problems, psychosis and things, and I'm of course sorry to hear that, but that also raises an important point, because if you're involved on any spiritual path, that is always a risk. I mean, obviously, if you start taking any path which gives you an altered state of consciousness, makes you aware of a different level of reality, is going to have dangers. So, we all know about psychedelics. I mean, it may open you up genuinely to newer realms of reality, but it's dangerous. And meditation can be dangerous too. You need to have a teacher, because even meditation, can lead to all sorts of dangerous encounters. And so I'm sorry you went through those experiences, but in some sense it's not unique. That is the danger of any spiritual path, I would say. Now, but then you raise the whole question of the role of the brain. And what I found interesting about your story was that actually, as soon as you took certain chemicals, the psychosis stopped. Okay. And there, of course, was clear evidence that the brain, the physical does affect your experience, your mental experience. So that itself is an important point, because most neuroscientists will infer that because something you do to the brain affects your experience, therefore your mind is generated by the brain. And I would argue that is not a necessary inference. Clearly, when consciousness is connected to your brain, anything you experience is exhibited by something in the brain, and if you do something to the brain, then it affects your experience. So if someone sort of hits you on the head with a hammer, you fall unconscious. So clearly, the brain does affect your experience. But again, I would say that doesn't mean that consciousness is actually generating. That doesn't mean the brain is generating consciousness. It merely says that so long as consciousness is linked to your brain, the brain affects it. Now, that then leads on to your final comment, I think, which is, since the brain affects your mental experience, the state of the brain affects your mental experience, you're saying, could the whole of reality be actually a creation of the brain? Okay, I think that's your point. Could it, in other words, could physical reality be an illusion generated by the brain?
Yes.
But of course, the problem with that is that the brain itself is part of the physical reality. So you can't be, if you're saying the brain is generating this view, you can't say everything in the physical world is an illusion, because the brain, which is generating the illusion, is part of the physical world. So I wouldn't infer from that, that the brain, the whole physical world is an illusion. Of course, you come to that conclusion, ironically, from certain religious traditions. I mean, in the Hindu tradition, one takes the view that the physical world is a dream, is an illusion.
Maya.
Is Maya, yeah, exactly. So, but that's, you're coming to that conclusion though from a spirit tradition. You're asking whether you come to that conclusion from the perspective of neuroscience, and but I think what is undoubtedly true is that we know that our perception of the physical world is very strongly affected by the brain, and indeed distorted by the brain. So we know from a philosophical perspective that we never actually have direct contact with the physical world. All we have experience of is a map, if you like, your map of the world, which you get through your various sensory systems. So I'm partly agreeing with you, because I'm saying that actually what we think is the physical world is not the external reality directly. It's that projection of the physical world which is generated by your brain, and that can generate all sorts of distortions. Our memory can be faulty. You can have higher order cognitive processes which distort the appearance of the physical world. You can have hallucinations which are generated by the brain. So I'm agreeing with you that certainly the appearance of the physical world is distorted by the brain, but I would argue that that doesn't mean the physical world doesn't exist. I would argue that there is an external reality, but the other thing I would argue is that the external reality doesn't only consist of the physical world. You see, most people would say that the physical world is real, but what's in your mind, your dreams, your hallucinations, if you take drugs, if you're having psychotic episodes, you know, the images you're seeing, they might say, well, that isn't real. The physical world is real, but that isn't real. I would disagree with that. I would say the world in your mind is equally real as the world outside. Okay, so the world you experience in your dreams has a reality, but the world you experience when you go on have a mystical experience and experience the totality of the universe, whatever, I would say that is also real. So what I would say is, I would say not that. I would not say that the physical world is real, the mental world is unreal, which is what most people would say. I wouldn't say, like some of the Eastern religions, that the physical world is unreal, but the mental world is real. I would say both worlds are real in some sense, although we only perceive them in a distorted way. And I'm going to come on to that in the second part of my talk. But so it's a fascinating question, and there's an entirely different level at which one could answer the question, which is the notion that the whole world, the physical universe itself, is a simulation, a computer simulation. Because, you know, the idea is that a computer can simulate the physical world and the interactions. You can have simulations with billions of particles. People do this in cosmology, and it looks just like the real world. And sometimes you can't tell whether it's the real world or a simulation of the real world or the real world within cosmology. And of course, we're used to this with virtual reality machines. How do you tell if it's a replication or the real world? And so some people and some philosophers have suggested that the physical universe itself is a simulation in a computer, that the laws of physics merely represent the laws of the software.